The first true Inca emperor was Pachacuti, the 9th Inca. He divided his small empire, still small, into 4 provinces. In the northwest, you had Chinche Suyu. Suyu is a province. Chinche Suyu in the northwest. In the northeast, you had Anti Suyu along the Andes. Anti Suyu. In the southwest, Kunti Suyu. And in the southeast, Kuya Suyu. And right there where all 4 of these Suyus met in the middle, that's Cuzco. It's like this federal district. Cuzco, the capital. So he's created this empire, he's organized it, and then he makes the head of his army his own son, Tupac Inca Yupanqui. And it's going to be Tupac Inca who really grows the empire into the massive polity that we all think of when we think of the giant Inca Empire. Maybe Tupac Inca Yupanqui's most significant conquest came in the far north. Here, in what today we call Ecuador. He marches north into Chinche Suyu. He extends the borders of that province everywhere he goes until finally he butts up against the Kingdom of Quito. Now, we don't know much about the Kingdom of Quito. A lot of its history is shrouded in mythology. But as far as we can tell, around here, at least traditionally, around the highlands of Ecuador lived the Quitu people, the Quitus. And sometime in the distant past, maybe in the 900s AD, the Quitus had been conquered themselves by a coastal Ecuadorian people called the Cara. So this joint Cara-Quitu culture develops, and it's this culture that produces the Kingdom of Quito. And the Kingdom of Quito is around for like 500 years when Tupac Inca Yupanqui, from way to the south in Cusco, shows up with his army. Well, the king of Quito now had a choice. He could submit willingly to the Inca. Tupac Inca Yupanqui had a huge army after all. These invaders looked fierce. But if he submitted, all his people would be subjugated. He'd probably lose his power and position. He decided to consult the gods on the matter. He said prayers, there were sacrifices, and in the end he was told by the gods to fight. So he made more sacrifices, this time sacrifices of several children, boys and girls. In fact, according to later chroniclers, one Quito nobleman, out of extreme piety, sacrificed all of his own children to ensure victory against the Incas. The Kingdom of Quito summoned all of its allies, and in the 1460s met Tupac Inca Yupanqui and his forces in pitched battle. And these are massive armies. Tupac Inca had something like 250,000 men fighting for him. Now think about that. 250,000 men. And the Kingdom of Quito able to muster a similar number. So a major battle, but in the end, it was the Incas who won the day. And Quito became an Inca town. Actually, one of Tupac Inca's favorite places. Almost immediately, Tupac Inca did what the Incas do. Assyria-like, Tupac Inca forced thousands of his subjects elsewhere in the empire, more loyal than these recently conquered northerners, to move up here, and he resettled them here. So sort of forced colonization in order to pacify the local population. According to tradition, it was just up the coast here in Manta, so up that way, that Tupac Inca first laid eyes on the Pacific Ocean. Now keep in mind that to him, he's already conquered virtually the entire known world. So he's surprised to find out from local seafarers that there is yet land across the sea. There's yet people across the sea. And so he does what he does. He confirms it with his local court necromancer, and then he builds a fleet. 400 balsa log rafts, sort of like the rafts you'd see up on Lake Titicaca, for 20,000 men. And he organizes this expedition and sets off himself. He goes with it. And for a whole year, no one hears from these guys. And then Tupac Inca returns. And he's got with him the jawbone of a horse, the hide of a horse. He's got a metal chair, and he's brought back some dark-skinned people, proving the story's true. Now this legend of Tupac Inca's expedition into the Pacific, is it true? Is it just legend? You be the judge. But turning back to the Inca's conquests, Tupac Inca Yupanqui next turned south of Quito, and he entered Cañari country. I'm in Cañari country right now. The Cañari were very fierce warriors. This was not to be an easy conquest for Tupac Inca. It took years of fighting and bloodshed, and then diplomacy and trickery and manipulation, but eventually the Incas were able to dominate the Cañari. In fact, it was right here in what had been sort of a Cañari capital, Tumepamba, at least the Incas called it Tumepamba, that Tupac Inca Yupanqui's son was born, destined to be the next Sapa Inca. After the Cañari, Tupac Inca continued on into what we call northern Peru and subdued the Chachapoyas, the people of the clouds. Now, the Chachapoyas, they'd been anticipating an Inca invasion, so they'd spent several years preparing defenses. So this also not an easy conquest, but in the end, again after much bloodshed, the Chachapoyas were subdued. And both the Cañari and the Chachapoyas would consistently rebel against the Incas, ultimately with great historical consequence. Tupac Inca Yupanqui continued his triumphant march. By 1470, he had conquered Chanchan, mighty Chanchan, the capital of the great desert hydraulic kingdom of Chimor. Now, this was a major conquest, maybe his greatest conquest, the greatest of his career. Chimor was huge. It controlled 600 miles or so of Peruvian coastline, and Chimor was wealthy. In fact, it was largely the gold produced by Chimor goldsmiths that would entice the Spanish to conquer this area in the future. Tupac Inca forced Chanchan goldsmiths to relocate to Cuzco, where they could craft items, gold and silver items, for him. Throughout the early 1470s, Tupac Inca continued to conquer. He's moving south along that Peruvian coast now. He takes Pachacamac, which is one of the great pilgrimage sites of South America with its idols and its oracle. He takes it, so in terms of legitimacy, very important, and then continues south, conquering over the next few years the desert kingdom to the south of Pachacamac. Now, all the while, he's carrying out that most Incan of policies, and that is forced repopulation, forced colonization. He'll take recalcitrant or rebellious populations, and he'll move them by the thousands, force them to go resettle somewhere in a loyal area. Or he'll take loyal subjects and force them to resettle in a rebellious area. Very, very Incan thing to do. Tupac Inca marched up into the Andes, subduing several hill tribes and peoples, little chiefdoms up in the hills and mountains, adding to Antisuyu, the province of Antisuyu. He then organized a very adventurous expedition, conquering expedition, into the Amazon, along the Rio Madre de Dios. He may have gotten as far as the modern Brazilian border. But a rebellion broke out in Cuyasuyu when a deserting general spread the rumor that Tupac Inca was dead. And Tupac Inca Yupanqui's brother tried to make himself the next Sapa Inca. Well, things didn't go well for these rebels because Tupac Inca Yupanqui wasn't dead. Instead, he reappeared. He ruthlessly crushed the rebellion, and its leaders, well, they were skinned. Their skins were made into drums. Their heads were placed on spikes, their followers were sacrificed to the sun, and Tupac Inca's own brother was beheaded. Tupac Inca also extended the borders of the empire east and south, deep into what today we call Bolivia. As he marched, thousands fled before him, thousands fled into the hills, thousands tried to find refuge in mountain fortresses, but he subdued them all and made all of these people his subjects. And it got to the point where he had envoys from distant peoples approaching him and begging to be part of his empire, if only to avoid a slaughter. At one point, he had envoys from Tupac in what is today northern Argentina approach him and beg to be part of his polity. Of course, he would accept these people on the condition that then they would accept colonists. He would send loyal colonists, loyal groups, to be repopulated in these newly subjugated areas so that the new subjects could be taught Quechua, the Inca language, and other Inca ways, and thereby be more fully integrated into the empire. Tupac Inca organized another expedition due south into Cuyasuyu to extend the borders of that province. 200,000 men, according to the accounts, 200,000 men. None of this territory was easily won. This was a very bloody affair. Local people banded together and fiercely resisted this Inca onslaught. These are Mapuche people. But eventually, the Incas, who continued to push on despite their losses, got all the way to the Rio Maule, which ended up sort of being the southern border of the Inca Empire for decades. This is the southernmost point the Inca Empire would ever extend. And today, if you were to look at a map, this expedition, if you want to know, what area did this expedition conquer, essentially we're talking about the entire northern half of modern Chile. The remainder of Tupac Inca Yupanqui's career was spent really consolidating all that he'd won. He did glorify the capital, Cusco, with great building projects. He spent 4 years on a great imperial tour of his domains. He traveled up north all the way here to Ecuador along this road to Quito, and then extended the boundaries of the empire further north for good measure. And then, a year after Columbus landed in the Americas, Tupac Inca Yupanqui died. Now, this was the man who took his father's modest little empire and created territorially what was something probably unprecedented in South America. Massive, massive empire that included all of what, for the Incas, was the known world. But in doing so, he likely sowed the seeds of the Incas' own demise. All those subjugated peoples, all those conquered peoples, they're going to be enemies of the Incas, or at least a lot of them will be. So when the Spanish show up, just like when the Spanish showed up in Mexico, when the Spanish show up here, the Incas have a lot of homegrown enemies, and many of them will end up siding with the Spanish to help bring the Incas down.